Hello and welcome to the 50th episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And what better way to mark this Jubilee than by talking about Spine 191, Jubilee, directed by Jarman, 1978. I first saw this in, I think it was 2004, 2005. Again, this was when I was exploring cinema, especially the Criterion Collection. It was a title that came up. It looked really interesting. I figured, why not? It was reflects the initial punk movement in the UK and is very much informed by it and so forth. And it was also the earliest soundtrack appearance of Brian Eno, and so it was kind of all these things that said, okay, I'll just give it a shot. And while I didn't dislike the film, but I also wasn't really big into it. I didn't quite get it, but I wasn't ready to just outright dismiss it and say, oh, it's rubbish and everything. So it was something that I kind of kept in the back of my mind later on. So I didn't go right out and say, oh, I got to get this film. I waited a bit. And it wasn't until in 2009 when I started thinking about it again more seriously. And then I wanted to revisit it and actually go all the way and get my own copy of it. So I got my own copy of Jubilee, and I liked it a lot more. Now, what accounted for this? Well, considering that it was 4 years difference, a lot can happen in 4 years, and certainly a lot happened to me personally and in many other respects. But I think maybe a lot of it had to do with just a better understanding of what was going on in the UK at that time, and certainly what led to punk, especially punk music and so on, and just the punk culture. In 2009, one of the things I was getting into was a lot of post-punk groups. These were groups that came about after that initial wave of punk, as best characterized by the Sex Pistols, and these would be groups like Joy Division, like Wire. I don't know if Buzzcocks can be considered punk or post-punk, but at any rate, so I was taking more of an interest in those bands, and particularly with Joy Division, and learning a bit more about the historical context of them. And even though they're technically post-punk, what inspired them, what helped form them was attending a couple of Sex Pistol gigs in Manchester. And so, as it was pointed out, when the Sex Pistols played at the Leicester Free Trade Hall in Manchester in 1976, even though there were about, I think there were 20 or 25 people in attendance, this was the concert that started about 20 different bands, and this included Joy Division. So because of that was going on, it kind of got me into revisiting. The other thing is that in 2000, and also in 2009, I had made the move from Virginia to Massachusetts, and apparently it was like the worst time to make such a move, because this was when the economy took a serious nosedive, and somehow, while what happened in 2009, and what unfortunately is still happening nowadays, we haven't really made any kind of significant recovery, no matter what anybody will tell you. It still sucks. In fact, I feel like what's going on right now is almost a revisit of what happened in 2009 in so many ways. God, that's depressing. Anyways, while what happened in 2009 was nowhere near what happened in the UK in the mid 70s, and it was quite bleak. I mean, you had 3-day work weeks. You had various strikes and everything that's going on. I mean, the 70s was a period of big suck. in the UK. I mean, no wonder you had Dark Side of the Moon come out as bleak as it was, and General Idea men setting up a collection fund to help the British, possibly done with a tinge of irony. The belief that a former colony can help its former parent in that way. So, and then of course this is what kind of led to the punk movement. It's this constant unrest and everything, and that led to this creative burst, which then leads into Jubilee. Now, Jubilee was made and was intended to be released during the Silver Jubilee. So while my Jubilee in this project that I'm doing is not the same kind of Jubilee that this refers to, this is a Silver Jubilee, mine is a Golden. But nonetheless, it was very much informed by that. So, now, okay, so the film itself is actually this is the first feature-length film of Derek Jarman. He had made a lot of Super 8 shorts prior to this, but this was like considered the first film of Derek Jarman's. The premise is Queen Elizabeth I, and the year is supposed to be 1577. She wants to be able to look into the future of her realm. What will be the future like for her realm? And so she consults her close astrologer and alchemist, John Dee, to allow this to happen. So he calls upon Ariel to give her the way of transporting herself into the future. So she goes forward 400 years from her time to see an England gone, by the way, gone to waste. It's an England that's where there's lawlessness, there's gangs that rule the day, and there's no hope for things getting better. It's just the best you can have is the best that can happen to you is that nobody will shoot you. That's considered the best, having the best day, and then everything else is just gone down to crap. It's presumed that the royal family was shot and is no longer there. So there's no monarch. There's no semblance of any kind of law and order or government. It's a state of anarchy, and it's done by these gangs. Actually, the closest you get to any semblance of order is this sort of business cultural mastermind named Boragins, who makes it his business to sign and promote various bands, and to basically it's controlling culture, and I'll get to him in a little bit. So it's not particularly very pleasant. Now, let's see, the aesthetic of it was very homemade. In fact, the whole film kind of feels like a poor man's A Clockwork Orange in a lot of respects. And this is not an insult, by the way. This is not, I'm not saying it's, but be prepared for that aesthetic. It's very, very homemade, but it's not, and there's a lot of improvisation in terms of the production design, but I think it's done, considering the resources and so forth. It comes off fairly well. But at any rate, I guess the big character I want to talk about is the character of Borga Gens. In revisiting the film, it finally hit me that Borga Gens is supposed to be a nod to the Borgias, the ones that even though you have war and strife, you also get the Renaissance. And I think it's what I like about that name and that association is that on the one hand, there is this sense that even in a period of lawlessness and where violence seems to rule the streets, there is always going to be a center that's going to maintain some semblance of culture, that it's going to lead you into something higher and maybe lead you out, and maybe whether you intend this to happen or not, eventually you're going to get out of it and you're going to achieve something like transcendence. But this also makes the comment that there's nothing transcendent at all about what he's doing. These are all acts that are very much punk. In fact, one of the newest acts he signs up goes by the name The Kid, and this kid is Adam Ant. Other acts this one gang is also kind of breaks into entertainment. In fact, there's one member of this gang that it largely focuses on is Amyl Nitrate, played by Jordan. Anyone who knows about the UK punk scene will know who Jordan is, and she was definitely one of the key figures of punk. So part of that, she was a protege of Malcolm McLaren, who also managed the Sex Pistols. So I mean, we're talking there are some serious punk credentials at play here. But anyways, so. In fact, there's a scene where Borga is announcing is showing off his entry into the Eurovision Song Contest, and it's Amyl Nitrate dressed as a Britannia soldier. So she has a unitard that has the Union Jack pattern on it. She has the helmet, so it looks so Britannia soldier, and it's singing, and she's singing this sort of punk disco-ish rendering of Rule Britannia, and it's arguably one of the most baffling kind of WTF moments in cinema history. Like, what? And where it completely. It's almost on the level of Alex singing in the rain as he's beating someone to death and raping his wife in A Clockwork Orange. It's kind of on that level. You're just kind of wondering, like, how am I supposed to react to this? This is kind of a little bit off. So anyways, so this is So yeah, this is the kind of culture that Borga Gins promotes. In fact, there's a moment where he's in the recording studio, and there's another member of this gang of girls. Amyl Nitrate's in it. Is in this gang. Bod, played by Jenny Runeker, who also plays Queen Elizabeth I. So this is one of those dual role affairs. But there's another girl in the gang named Mad, played by Toya Wilcox, and this was her first film that she was in, and so she's another punk artist. But anyways, so the scene is that Borga Gins is in this recording studio while this band is performing, and he says, Let the music be loud as possible so that nobody hears the world falling apart. And that line hearing that line really stuck with me. Especially, well, one, because if you're into popular music and recorded music and commercially available music, you probably have heard the phrase loudness wars, where it seems like the overall volume of music is so cranked up because you feel like every single nanosecond has to be louder than the last one, resulting in less dynamic very flattened process, seemingly over-processed mush of noise. And so that's one reason for this. And then the other is let's make the music so loud and let's make it so present that it completely blankets you to what's going on in the world. It's a very, very chilling line. So again, it's those little moments, especially with Borga Gins, played very Hammondly. It's a very hammy performance by his real name is Jack Burkett, but he goes by Orlando is his stage name. But it's a very hammy, over the top kind of what was this? Kind of Battlefield Earth like, kind of Dungeons and Dragons, Jeremy Irons over the top villain kind of play. It's kind of on that level, but it's done to make a point. It's not done just for its own sake or supposedly going for this or this tone mishmash or something. It's all done with a purpose. So that's something that I definitely I kind of get from this. I will say that, I mean, like I said before, this was a film that it took me a while to warm up into, and this was a film that I gave it a shot because I knew that there would be some things that would be very interesting. I mean, for starters, that it was made during the peak of the punk movement, and it was sort of understood as a punk piece. It was also, when it came out, it was also known to cause a quite stir amongst punk circles. The most famous incident happened with Vivienne Westwood, who made a T-shirt, which was basically an open letter to Derek Jarman, saying how he had misrepresented punk through this film, and so there was a lot of disowning of the film by those who claim themselves to be punk, which is funny because you would think that part of the what was advertised about punk was that this was an inclusive movement, that this was all about people banding together over a common cause, and it shouldn't matter like where you stand, but there is sort of an elitism that's present in the punk movement. I think this showcased it, and I think what caused the strong reaction was that, and this could be blamed on Derek Jarman, is that he did initially conceive of this as a punk film. That, you know, it was going on at the time, and he thought maybe this is something he could do for it. But of course, over the course, this was one of those things that because it was a handmade affair, and he was involved, and he was interested in other things, the film itself took on other things, and in that respect, it makes it more interesting. It makes it more of an interesting film. It's the thing with films, like I've said this before with talking about influential films, is that sometimes the danger of an influential films is that they can sometimes appear more like artifacts of their time. In other words, they're made of a time, they're made about a time, but then the further away you go from that time, it starts to lose its relevancy and its potency. It's no longer as gripping as it is because it's so informed by its particular time. But what can make a film last longer is that if it does more than just be a part of its own ephemera. And I think that's the great thing about Jubilee, is that while it was very much informed of its time, it's definitely a product of its time. You have, I mean, Adam Ant's in it, Wayne County's in it, Susie and the Banshees makes an appearance. The Slits make an appearance. Jordan is in it. It was later disowned by certain punk members like Vivienne Westwood. So it was very much a product of its time, but it also dealt with other things of interest of Derek Jarman. And actually, what's interesting to me about this is that punk is often thought of as a very anti-conservative movement. That it's very very liberal, and it certainly is. If you think about conventional norms, it definitely goes against a lot of them. There's no denying that. But there is a conservative tinge that you can extract from Jubilee, and this is actually a reflection of Derek Jarman himself. Now, what I mean by conservative, I mean this is how the UK defines it. This is not the same thing as the US. In fact, if it weren't, aside from the fact that he was that Derek Jarman himself was openly gay and very liberal socially, in a lot of other respects, he was very conservative. He was. He was quite. In fact, a lot of what Jubilee ended up being was his. It ended up being his dystopia, which is why I compared it to A Clockwork Orange. That and a lot of other things kind of strikes me as being like A Clockwork Orange, but it is a very bleak view of the future. It's this belief that you have lawlessness, and the only semblance of any kind of law and order or maybe anything of higher value is going to be done by these few little gangs, and even they are subservient to this overlord that controls the media, that controls the cultural output, and dishes out this very calculated, processed, generic, cookie cutter thing that really doesn't add anything to it. So that's the kind of thing that he's making. And I'm not saying this because I happen to agree with a lot of it, but it does. I think it does make it a lot more interesting if it had stuck to its ephemeral side, if it was purely a film about punk, then it would just be looked on as just an artifact of its time, and then that's really it. You watch it because you want to know what punk was all about. You want to know what it was like in the UK in the mid to late 70s, and then you just move on, and that's it. But what makes it even interesting nowadays is it's because of these other things. And Derek Jarman himself was really interested in history. He loved art. He was a big fan of Caravaggio. In fact, one of his last films did deal with Caravaggio. So it's having that sense of history. I think that's and this is what makes Jubilee interesting. The fact that you have this setup of Queen Elizabeth I wanting to go into the future to see the future for Rome. It also gives Derek Jarman a chance to comment on the present by evoking the past. And this is, of course, the aspects of the past that he likes. He felt more closer to Elizabethan England. I think even with all of its own problems and its own issues, he feels more closer to that time period than he does with the modern period. But of course, what makes Derek Jarman also interesting is that even though he has that sensibility, he understands that he's not of that time. He was of this particular time, and things were happening, and he was responding and reacting to that time as well, and not just merely. It's not just revisiting a past history. It's for him, and I think it's more of an incorporation. It's why not do this and this, and instead of being exclusive to one thing or the other, or excluding the present at the expense of the past and vice versa. Like, why not try to do both? And Jubilee does show this. But I will say that I think what will make it difficult on the first viewing is part of it is the production aesthetic, which again, it was very homemade. It was done for very little money. It was done with very limited resources. But I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. But if you're not used to that, then it could put you off. If you're expecting, Academy level production design, forget it. This is much closer to the initial home movies that Derek Jarman made with his friends. Now, to their credit, it's not that it's not. I say home movies, but it's not like it was all completely cobbled together. It was done with care. It's just that the resources were limited. But I think that's what gives it its charm. Is utilizing those limited resources, and it still makes it makes it interesting, and it makes the point really well. It's that's the great paradox with creativity, is that the imagination is unbounded, but often it's the means that you have to create the end result are very limited. You're limited by time, you're limited by money, you're limited by materials, you're limited by everyone's knowledge and talents and skills, and it's using those limits to create something that can evoke something limitless, so that can go beyond itself. That's the great paradox of creativity. This combination of limitless and having limits, or in other words, a bounded infinity is what creativity is. It's a bounded infinity. But at any rate, what else can I say about Jubilee? So yeah, it may be a little bit tough to watch the first go around, but I think if you give it a chance and know that it was definitely a product of its time, and the context that surrounds the film is interesting to note, and also what Jarman was evoking through this film, I think is what makes it definitely worth reviewing again. So you may be put off the first time, but it's definitely one of those two viewing affairs, and certainly knowing the history about the film, and there are some supplements in here that do that quite well, and of course just looking things up on the internet also helps to a large extent. It will give you a better appreciation of the film itself, and in a way, I'm glad that I didn't outright dismiss the film on first viewing. I'm glad that I gave it the benefit of the doubt. It's like, well, maybe I'm just not. Maybe there's just something I'm not getting, or maybe this is something I may have to go back to. And then, sure enough, I did go back to it, and I ended up liking it a lot more. Especially since I got a better understanding of the history of the UK at that time, and also feeling my own personal circumstances being somewhat comparable to what was going on at that time, and that also helps. That when you feel like nothing is going right, when you feel like tomorrow, if you have that feeling that tomorrow is worse than what you're experiencing today, you begin to appreciate a lot more bleaker material, including Jubilee, and there's plenty of, and I know plenty of other bleak films that are there, like A Clockwork Orange, like Blade Runner. I mean, those films seem to speak more, and the fact that that the film itself can speak more and can even touch into that, considering that it was 2009 is different. When I first revisited it again, is very different than 1977 when it was first made. It's that paradox of history where things change, but then again nothing changes, and still there are changes. So yeah, I would say that if you have any interest in punk, you should definitely check it out. And I think even if you don't have an interest in punk, it's certainly worth giving a shot. But I can also understand if there are certain aspects like the production aesthetic, some of the ideas that are evoked or presented may not be to your liking. And there's actually at one point which, like, for instance, there's a scene where there's this. It's supposed to be this orgy, and I kind of take it as Derek Jarman's own solidarity service, a la Brave New World. And there's and that can be kind of off-putting as well. But I would say that if give it a shot. Try to keep an open mind. Try to learn as much as you can about the history behind the film and what Jarman was saying through the film. If you give that a shot, then I think it will be worthwhile. But it may be in the end that you just watch this and you just say that this is just complete rubbish, and then just leave it at that. I would also say that I've mentioned this a few times in some episodes. I know of various internet-based reviewers, and this is where I'll give a little plug to Cal Kalgren. Also can be known as Owen Citizen, but he has made the series Brows Held High, which is sort of his him looking at art house films. And there is an episode, and one of his episodes he does cover Jubilee. So definitely see that review. If you haven't seen Jubilee and you want to know more what it was about, or if you felt like what I'd said didn't cover enough ground, definitely check out his review, especially since he puts in clips, so you can get a sense of what I mean by the production aesthetic and so on. Definitely check that out. If between those reviews you want to give it a shot, then that will determine whether you want to give this a shot or not, is by hearing what I have to say and then seeing what Kyle has to say about it as well. So there you go. Wow. I am now a third of the way done for this. So here's to another 50 more. Jubilee. All right, and that was Jubilee. And until next time, take care.